13 years ago, James threw a copy of the divorce papers at me and said, "I've sold the house because I'm moving in with her." At that time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. "So, Cindy, the divorce is already settled. Take David and leave as soon as possible." His words have stayed with me ever since. I was surprised by what David said when he came back from a job interview at a company. I asked the HR interviewer, "Does your company condone affairs?" Suddenly, his face was filled with a smile like I had never seen before. The interviewer had apparently denied it. So, I asked, "That's strange. Then why are you here?" Indeed, the interviewer was my former husband, James Irving. "My name is Cindy Reed, and I am 48 years old. I work in a call center for an insurance company. My only family is my son, David. We were abandoned by my husband, James, 13 years ago. I met James when I was 20 years old. I had just graduated high school and started working as an office worker at a subsidiary of a pharmaceutical company. At 20, I met James Irving, who was 27 at the time and had been transferred to our office from the headquarters. For some reason, he took an interest in me and started inviting me to dinner. I had just become old enough to drink alcohol. There's no doubt I was thrilled to be asked out by an elite from the headquarters. After a few such occasions, we started dating, and I eventually became pregnant. I was shaken. I thought he would be angry and break up with me. But instead, James proposed marriage. When we went to tell my parents about our marriage, my father was still alive at that time, and James told him, "I will make your daughter happy." Back then, marriages because of pregnancy were not seen in a very positive light. So our ceremony was very simple. Eventually, our son, David, was born. By that time, James had returned to working at the headquarters, and I moved the place with him, becoming a full-time housewife. I devoted myself to maintaining our home. When David started elementary school, we bought a house with the help of James's parents. I thought I was living a happy life. It was supposed to be, but I was turning a blind eye. As David grew older, James started coming home later and later. Married at the young age of 20, I didn't know what a typical married life was like. I never questioned why I didn't know James's colleagues or superiors. Looking back, there were plenty of signs that could have led to divorce. Then, on the day David turned 14, James left us after saying he had filed for divorce and sold the house. Suddenly, I was a single mother with a 14-year-old son, moving back to my childhood home without any prior notice. My brother and his wife were cold towards me. By this time, my father had passed away, and the house belonged to my brother and his wife. My mother, who was around 60 at that time, was diminished by my strong-willed sister-in-law and my blunt nieces. During this time, David and I were told, "You can stay for a bit, but find a job and leave as soon as you can." I couldn't immediately think of any job I could do. I was a high school graduate with office work experience but no special skills. Yet, we had to survive somehow. I scoured job listings, looking for work that could support me and my growing son. I was still lucky, though. David was 14, a difficult age, but he was sensible enough. It was better than being in the same situation with a baby carrying. I ended up working at a call center for an insurance company, where my office work experience came in handy. Initially, I was a contract employee, but I eventually became a permanent staff member. It was an unknown world at first, and I was exhausted both mentally and physically. But I learned things I didn't know at the time of my divorce. I was a high school graduate from a non-academic family. My ignorance was partly to blame for the financial difficulties I faced during the divorce. I should have demanded property division and child support from my husband. But I couldn't think of it. Neither did my mother or brother. Well, if my brother had cared even a little, he might have gotten some advice from someone. But he didn't. I realized my unjust treatment after joining the insurance company and learning new things. But by then, it was too late. That's why I wanted David to go as far as he wanted in his education. Wisdom and knowledge can save you. I didn't want him to end up like me. Now, 13 years later, our jobs, salaries, and lives have stabilized. David entered a prestigious national university in science. And he even went on to a doctoral program. As a mother, I was amazed. He even said he would manage the tuition fees himself. I wondered how he could manage his studies and finances. But he found a non-repayable scholarship and secured it for himself. All I did was sign the guardian section. David spent 4 years in college and 5 years in graduate school, demonstrating his competence and attracting scouts from various companies. This is exactly what they mean by a black kite gives birth to a hawk. David's future is surely filled with light. However, amidst all this, memories of that day unexpectedly resurface, the day my former husband abandoned me. That memory still whirls darkly within me. It was truly sudden. James came home and, without warning, tossed a crumpled piece of paper at David and me. When I opened it, it was a copy of the divorce papers. I had no recollection of signing them. Yet, my name was written on it in handwriting eerily similar to mine. When I asked what he meant by this, James said, "I've sold the house because I'm moving in with her." I couldn't understand what he was saying. The idea of divorce was completely out of the blue. "So, Cindy, the divorce is already settled. You and David need to leave as soon as possible." He threatened that if we didn't leave within 3 days, he wouldn't be lenient. At that time, I was 35 years old. Having been a housewife for 14 years. I couldn't even begin to think of what to do next and simply headed to my parents' house. I still remember my husband's voice from that time. Maybe it would be best to forget it. After all, David and I are living relatively settled lives now. It's not that I'm holding on to the past. It's the frustration at my own helplessness and the resentment towards James that resurfaces. Knowing now that I could have done something. On a certain holiday, when I had finally decided to sleep in, enjoying a rare day off, my smartphone began to ring. The number on the screen was not registered. So I decided to ignore it and went back to bed. But the ringing continued, on and off. Eventually, I heard someone's voice from the voicemail. It was the former mother-in-law. She kept saying, "Please let your son speak to me." I wondered what she meant but decided not to answer directly. Later that evening, David returned home in a suit, which was unusual. When I told him about the call from earlier, he burst into laughter, saying, "So, she did call." David, with an expression I had never seen before, laughed so hard that he was shaking and even had tears in his eyes. "David, what did you do?" "I had a job interview today, remember?" "I told you." "Don't lie. Tell me the truth." "It's not a lie, but..." Then, David began to share what had happened that day. The interview was indeed real. And it was with a pharmaceutical company that had been scouting him for some time. The problem was with the company itself. The pharmaceutical company David mentioned was the one where I used to work as an office worker at its subsidiary. It's no coincidence," David nonchalantly said. "By the way, the HR manager who came for the interview was James Irving." "What did you say?" "The funny thing is, he didn't realize I was his son at all." "Did you know?" "Of course. Besides, I didn't even need this interview in the first place." "Is that so?" "Yes. After all, this company came scouting for me. There was no need for an interview or anything. But as the HR manager, he must have seen your resume, right? He must have. But my appearance has changed a lot since middle school, you know? The hairstyle, the vibe, everything. Well, that's true. 13 years is a long time. Plus, I doubt he even remembered my face from back then. That made sense. I had been so focused on my own feelings that I hadn't considered how distant James had become from David. Besides, seeing my current address and academic background, he wouldn't have connected me as his son, even with the same name. That might be true. David had been an above-average student in middle school. But after the divorce and changing schools, he started studying unusually hard. His grades jumped to the top. He went to a high school that matched his performance, maintaining nearly the top spot in the science class, and then to a prestigious state university, with a recommendation from a professor in his third year. David spent 5 years in graduate school, from master's to doctorate, achieving various accomplishments that were beyond my understanding. The scouts from companies were a result of his achievements, with several chemical and pharmaceutical companies interested in him. So, I was in a position to choose. He mentioned this casually. That's why I asked for the interview. I had researched and knew he was the HR manager. I was surprised by how much David had prepared. But he didn't change his expression at all when he saw me. The interview was standard, except David had the opportunity to ask more questions. So, I asked the HR interviewer, "Does your company condone affairs?" Suddenly, David's face was filled with a smile like I had never seen before. "So, what did the HR manager say to that?" He said, "Of course, that would not be ethically permissible. It's laughable, right?" That's why I continued, "That's strange. Then why are you here?" At that moment, the HR manager's face froze instantly. David couldn't stop laughing. Then, thankfully, the executive next to him asked me what I meant by my remark. That's when I pulled this out. He was holding a crumpled piece of paper, the copy of the divorce papers that James had thrown at me that day. I told them, "This is a copy of a document that my mother was deceived into submitting by this man long ago. What do you think about this? You've been keeping that copy all this time." I thought it had been thrown away. No, I definitely threw it away myself. I didn't want to see it. I thought I had to throw everything away and leave. Yeah, I picked it up after Mom threw it away. That's why it's all wrinkled. I've kept it in a clear file like this all along, thinking it should never be lost. Why? Because this is evidence of what he did to Mom and of forging an official document. And not just that. There's the crime of using a forged document, among other things. After all, that divorce document was invalid at the time. So him marrying another woman means he committed bigamy. Bigamy? I'm not an expert, so I asked a friend from law school about it. Whether this could constitute a crime. A crime. Yeah, it's a clear crime. So, right there, I said, "Isn't this the crime of forging an official document?" And I gave the executive a copy of the copy. That makes sense. Since the original copy is here, a copy of the copy. Because this copy itself has his fingerprints all over it. I wouldn't hand over the actual piece of evidence. Then what do you think he did? What did he do? He suddenly stood up and shouted, Are you treating your father as a criminal?" And then he pleaded with the executive. "Saying what I'm saying is a complete lie, a misunderstanding." What? I felt like laughing. What was that man talking about? But the executive was impressive. He seemed to understand what I was trying to say. He turned the questions towards him. "You know, there are power dynamics within a company? He was probably eyeing the position of the next executive. The executive seemed to be assessing his character. He first kicked him out of the room and then said to me, "Did you request this interview not for employment, but for this purpose?" I did apologize. "I am very grateful for the scout offer from your company and find it an attractive enterprise. However, I wondered, what if this company, which keeps such an unethical person, is not for me?" David spoke so boldly. I was amazed he could say all that so casually during an interview. The executive was really decent. Regardless of whether I would join or not, he thanked me for informing him. He said he wondered why, after divorcing and then remarrying a while later, he chose another much younger woman. And he remembered Mom. Really?
Yeah.
Mom, you said our wedding was small, right? The executive was one of the few guests, as my father's boss at the time. So it was. But he said to others that he was the one cheated on but didn't ask for compensation to grant the divorce. However, the executive wondered why he didn't take me with him. The executive had been suspecting, from my photo and name, that it might be me. What? At that time, Mom didn't have the knowledge, and we were thrown out because of it. That's right, I'm so sorry. I would definitely fight with a lawyer now, but back then, It's okay. I know Mom was always a housewife and suddenly thrown out to work. And raise me was tough enough. Hey, Mom, I hardly remember him. He was always about work, if it even wasn't work. Indeed, James was hardly ever at home back then. Perhaps marrying me was a mistake for him in the first place. He rarely took me to his parents' house. It was only during the holidays, and even then, I was just made to help in the kitchen. And usually, it was all about work, passing each other by. He decided on the house, and suddenly we were living in it. When I started elementary school, I quickly realized our family was different from normal ones. That's why I acted out a bit in elementary school. What? Was that so? An early case of teenage rebellion. So, right after starting middle school, I sensed the presence of another woman from him. Did you say something to him? I didn't say anything because I thought it would make Mom sad. But I regret not speaking up when he threw the divorce papers at Mom and told us to leave. David's voice was strained. I had never heard such a tone from him before. Mom, I decided I needed a weapon that no one could take from me. A weapon? Something that would make me indispensable. With it, I thought I could one day confront what he did. David then said, I hate to say it, but I've used Mom's situation as a negative example. A negative example. Yes, that might be true. He was able to easily abandon Mom because neither you nor your family had the knowledge to fight back. Honestly, I'm also angry at my uncles. You're angry at your uncles, too? I won't bother with them. But even if I join a good company and succeed, I'll never have anything to do with them. Except for Grandma. Is that so? I felt a bit relieved.
Yeah.
Because Grandma was the only one who told me about what happened to Mom back then. And kept saying sorry and crying. When did she tell you that? After I entered university. My cousins started acting all friendly because I was a student at that university, which was creepy. What a surprise. To think that my nieces were doing such things. Hey, Mom, maybe we could take in Grandma? What? She's always felt sorry towards you. And it's painful to see her having to be cautious around her daughter-in-law and those kids. Thank you. After finishing our conversation, I mentioned something that had been on my mind. By the way, I've been getting calls from unknown numbers recently. David took my smartphone, saying, "Let me see." He recognized. Oh, this. It's his family's number. The executive gave it to me. David pressed the call button and put it on speaker mode, saying dismissively, "Hello? Hello? Is that David?" The voice that came from the other side was that of the former mother-in-law. "I've heard from your father. You've made it to the doctoral program at that university and received company scouts. Haven't you? To think such a fine young man could come from that mother. Surely, it must be thanks to our blood." David whispered sarcastically in response. "How about you become our adopted son? You'll be busy and need money, right? It's better than staying with that poor woman. And you're old enough for marriage, right? We can arrange a good match for you from our side. How about it? Good deal, right? Are you listening, David? Sorry for being such a woman." I spoke coldly into the smartphone. "What? By any chance, did you hear that I was the one who cheated?" Well. So it's not true then. In that case, as David says, we won't hold back. I'll let him take over. Long time no see." I was surprised to hear from the company's executive that my mom was accused of cheating. "So, you were involved too?" "No, we were deceived by James." "Calling my mom such a woman means you were complicit in a crime, did you realize?" "What?" "It's a shame, but it's beyond the statute of limitations. However, your son committed bigamy by forging a divorce document and remarrying. It's embarrassing for me to have his blood. Of course, I want nothing to do with his parents in the future." "Oh. But expect a visit from the lawyer my mom and I will be hiring. Don't you want the inheritance? When I die, it will all go to you." David snorted with laughter. "Worry about the compensation you'll have to pay instead." After saying that, David ended the call. Did I go too far? I shook my head vigorously. At the same time, laughter welled up from the bottom of my heart. "Right, if you've gone to all this trouble for me, I need to take action too." With a pat on my back, David cheered me on. Following that, I got a referral to a law firm through one of David's friends, and decided to pursue a claim for compensation. I learned about James's affair from him 13 years ago. However, I hadn't investigated who he married after that. I didn't want to think about it and didn't have the spare capacity. Upon reinvestigating, among the items included in the claim for compensation were the forgery of our divorce document by James. And on top of that, his submission of a marriage document with another woman, constituting the crimes of forgery of official documents and bigamy. Although it's too late to pursue criminal charges due to the statute of limitations, it served as a weapon in the compensation claim. I claimed compensation against James and his current wife. Additionally, I demanded 4 years of child support for David from James personally. Following that, my phone started ringing off the hook again. Me, a bigamist? Who filled your head with that nonsense? You've ruined me. Are you trying to destroy my wife and kids too? Come on, I gave you a good life for 14 years, didn't I? Don't think this will end here, and so on. So, I replied just once. Then, why not sell your current house? After that, I changed my phone number. As a result, James, hit by a double attack from David and me, ended up paying the compensation, was ousted from his HR manager position, and was demoted to the deputy manager of a distant factory. This was a story I heard from the executive after meeting him again. Apparently, the deputy manager position was nothing more than a nominal taskmaster, absolutely powerless against the actual factory manager. Even though the statute of limitations has passed, the revelation of multiple crimes dropped his character evaluation to the bottom. He was on the elite track within the company, but now it's over. The pharmaceutical company's factory is located far from the metropolitan area, James had to sell his condominium to pay my compensation, as that was the only way he could afford the amount we demanded. His wife and children had no choice but to follow him. It seems his wife had nowhere else to turn. She had been a full-time housewife since marrying him at 20, and that decision backfired. She wanted to stay in the metropolitan area with her children, but that was impossible. Her parents' home was as rural as the relocation site, and it seems she was disliked by her in-laws. But considering how they treated me, it's no surprise. They should have corrected their son, who married a 20-year-old twice, instead of trying to cut losses with their incompetent grandchildren. Thus, they tried to cozy up to David. Here's a capable grandchild. But David wasn't interested. By the way, I heard an interesting story. After settling the matter of the compensation, the lawyer shared this with me. You know, he's truly a city boy at heart. What does that mean? His new location requires a car. I clapped my hands in realization. He's over 50 and rushing to get a driver's license, and his wife, too. His wife too? Absolutely. Without a car, they can't manage anything there, including taking the kids to school or grocery shopping. Plus, in such rural areas, you won't find work without a means of transport. I laughed at the thought. I already had a driver's license, thanks to my mother insisting I get one, even lending me the money for it. That was the right decision. Just hearing their story made me laugh. Let that proud former elite learn the hard lessons of obtaining a driver's license in his 50s. And the next spring, David joined a research institute at another company, thrilled to finally focus solely on his research. The revenge was complete. Now, it was all about enjoying life, as David said, now my youth really begins. Of course, when he might find someone to marry was another question. Well, rushing into marriage isn't always good. My mother, who started living together with us, expresses her feelings deeply. Indeed. For David, who was not at all interested in girls. I hope he will find a suitable partner for himself in the future. As part of David's job placement, we rented a slightly larger room in between both of our workplaces and moved in together. For a while, we three want to spend our days that have finally come in peace.